Thank you for joining us. And what we're here today to talk about is retrofit in the workplace. And in particular, we're here to talk about a project called Near Home. Now, Near Home is something that I could talk about all day, and some of my colleagues will probably tell you that I have, because I was the project manager on the project. So it has been my life for over a year now. It's a fascinating project, and I'm delighted to be able to share the initial results with you now. Joined today by some of the project team. Now, we had an excellent team together. This is one of the things that has made this project such a success. We couldn't get all of the team on, but I'm delighted to get some of the key members on today. So first of all, we have Matt Eastwood, who is the Head of Innovation and Supply Chain at Transport Scotland. Matt was our sponsor for the project. I'm also joined by Matt Stevenson, who is the founder of Ecosystems, who are responsible for their offsite manufacturing specialists, and they're responsible for the structural design and the concept behind Near Homes. Also we have Neil Hemmingway from 360 Architects. 360 were responsible for the interiors of what we're going to see today, and also for the general workplace concept and how it fits into bigger workplace design trends. And finally, John Stinson from BRS will be joining us. John was responsible for the life cycle analysis along with his team. One of the things that we really wanted to identify with this was to look at the carbon footprint of the project. So to kick things off, what we're going to do is we're going to show you a video which shows how far we've got with the project. So we're joined as well, you can't see her, but Danielle from our marketing team is online. So Danielle, if you could share the video with everyone, thank you. Great, thanks for that, Danielle. And what you've seen there is a video we produced at the end of phase 1 of the project. What we did in phase 1 was the initial design for the Near Homes concept, and what we're trying to achieve here is looking at producing a toolkit that will allow a kit of parts retrofit to be used by anyone. The toolkit will be open source eventually once it's been completed, and we'll be able to use, it's flexible, be able to use for multiple different spaces and different areas. What you'll also have seen in the video there, when we're looking at some of the images that were constructed, is that's going to be the prototype for the, which is our next phase. The prototype for this, we're going to design and install this at a unit in East Kilbride Shopping Centre, and that's where the team are now. We're now working on getting that next phase in motion, which we hope to be commencing fairly quickly. Now, first, before we move on to our speakers, I'd like to bring up our first poll. Danielle, could you bring that up? Thank you. And all we want to know is, have you found working from home more challenging than working in an office over lockdown? And we just want to know yes or no. Very simple question there. The question will remain up for about 30 seconds, and we will get the results in very quickly. 50-50. I don't think we've ever had a straightforward split like that before. So very split answers there. So thank you everyone for that. Right, so what we're going to move on to now, we're going to move on to our speakers. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Matt Eastwood. Matt Eastwood is Head of Innovation and Supply Chain at Transport Scotland. Matt has been our sponsor and a great supporter of the project throughout. What Matt's going to do is he's going to talk a little bit about the rationale behind the project and how it ties in with Scottish Government policy. So Matt, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. So you've already had a great introduction to the project, and I'm going to briefly provide you with some context before other speakers go into a little bit more detail about the project. So COVID-19 led to some fundamental changes to workplace patterns and workplace settings. For many, working in large centralised offices was not the norm throughout the pandemic, and nor was the daily commute. Data published by the UK Office for National Statistics suggests that 44% of people in Scotland were working from home during lockdown, compared to just 4% in 2019. And thanks to the Herculean efforts of the vaccination programme, we're now emerging from the worst effects of the pandemic. And whilst COVID-19 is very much something we still need to deal with and take measures to address, COVID restrictions can now be eased and society is opening back up, and some of us might even be returning to the office. So whilst there's certainly some pressure in some quarters for a speedy return to the office, there's also a lot of evidence to suggest that many organisations see the potential benefits of home working or near to home working. With many looking at a blended model of working in the longer term. And the pandemic certainly appears to have precipitated or accelerated a shift to altered patterns of working. A survey by the Chartered Institute of Professional Development found that 72% of Scotland's employees expect a greater demand for home working or some form of flexible working in the future. But of course, not everyone can work from home. For many of us, home working is not a practical option in the long term. And there are likely to be opportunities to benefit from near to home working, even if we can't work from home. Reducing the commute, increasing opportunities to walk and cycle, closer proximity to school and nursery, and better home and work-life balance. So the 2020 programme for government included a commitment to support the idea of 20-minute neighbourhoods, neighbourhoods where people can meet their needs within a 20-minute walk from their house, enabling people to live better, healthier lives, and supporting the Scottish Government's net zero ambitions. And working closer to home can be an important component of 20-minute neighbourhoods and has the potential to contribute to the economic vibrancy of the local community. Many of our high streets are heavily dependent on retail, and there was significant pressure on the retail sector before the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's certainly a significant pressure now post-pandemic. So local work hubs have the potential to provide an opportunity to reduce this dependency on retail and also contribute to the economic vibrancy of local communities by increasing local footfall. And during lockdown, the shift to remote working resulted in environmental improvements, including significant reductions in local air quality issues and also transport-related carbon emissions as a result of reduced commuting. And a recent report to the UK Parliament by the UK Committee on Climate Change emphasised the need to capitalise on the shifts in behaviour seen during the pandemic, including increased remote working to reduce travel demand. Through the Near to Home project, we want to develop and test a solution for creating safe, secure and connected workplaces, as we've heard, and take advantage of the opportunities that are presented by existing vacant buildings and realise some of the potential benefits that can be derived from near to home working. Now, it's probably too early to say what the future of post-pandemic work will look like, but shifts in workplace culture are likely to come in part through the commercial choices that employers will make regarding office space, consideration about workforce well-being, and also morale and productivity as well. But in this context, Near Home provides a timely opportunity for us to help drive and inspire positive change by tackling some of the challenges, piloting new and innovative approaches, and providing a free-to-use open source toolkit offering some of the solutions. So now I'm going to hand you back to Lindsay for more information about the project. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Matt. Appreciate that introduction there. And if anyone has any questions for Matt on the policy or any of our panelists, then please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get towards them at the end. Now, I would like to introduce you to our second Matt Stevenson. Matt is founder of Ecosystems and offsite specialist. Matt also has expertise in the use of Scottish timber. Matt's going to talk about the structure of near homes and the use of the materials within it. So Matt, I'll hand over to you.
Great, that's brilliant. Thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to introduce really the structural kit-apart system that we evolved for the Near Home project. We were delighted to be the lead designer on this project and working with a fantastic team that, along with Construction in Scotland Innovation Centre, we assembled to deliver the project. And this project builds upon a wider piece of work which we're doing in collaboration principally with Construction Scotland Innovation Centre and with Edinburgh Napier University, looking at establishing a biogenic offsite manufacturing accelerator, for which we've been fortunate to secure £1.25 million of Innovate UK funding. That project seeks to really develop the homegrown engineered timber products. So what you can see on this slide here is we're looking to move our homegrown products up the value chain through delivering homegrown versions of both existing products, but also the innovative development of new products, which is very much what this project is about. We do that by looking at it through the lens of the 5 capitals approach, which looks at physical, natural, social, human, and financial capital. And we also sort of put that through the filter of industry drivers, which we've got sustainability, culture, productivity, regulation, digitization, and skills. And when we kind of fuse all of those key drivers together, we seek to create enhanced systems formed in our factory space that can add value by optimizing the product family architecture relative to the end application. So we're looking to create a set of product systems, processes which respond to that brief. And in doing that, we'll create a series of living lab projects, which this is a key one of. I'll not go too much into this, but through all of that, there's a digital thread which runs through the entirety of that process, from the technical design through digital twin of both the product and the process, component prototyping, creating these living lab projects to really sort of demonstrate the viability of each of those aspects, and use that as a catalyst for moving through to the commercialization phase, where we'll have full-scale manufacture, and that can thereby stimulate follow-on product development. So an early output of that project was the development of the Synergy 2-bed duplex, which is also essentially our homegrown mass timber demonstrator. We worked with BSW Timber to they successfully dried down homegrown Sitka spruce to a 12% moisture content, which is phenomenal achievement, and demonstrates the viability of our homegrown resource. Perception has often been that the homegrown resource would not be suitable for this. This project has served to clearly demonstrate that it is. With that raw material that was produced by BSW, we then worked at the innovation factory at CSIC using the UK's only vacuum press, which is located there, to produce a suite of products. So not only the cross-laminated timber product, which you can see in the bottom left of the screen, but also in tandem with that, some glue lam floor panels, which you can see bottom right, and nail laminated ceiling panels, which is a new product which we evolved, which uses beech lignalock nails, and also this new product of a glue laminated timber portal, all coming together to form this 2 modules of the 2-bed demonstrator. Now within that, we've got the evolution of this. Sorry, it's a poor resolution on this slide, but we evolved this glue laminated timber portal, which is essentially a hybrid between the CLT and glue lam. And what we were keen to do within this project was take that forward and create the fundamentals of the kit apart system. So you've seen the video, and hopefully it articulates well that we've got this kit of parts which can be with which we can respond to different contexts of different scenarios, which are can demonstrate more clearly in a minute. But we have a glue laminated timber portal which we can achieve different clear spans, different spacing very efficiently. Now, it's important that this is a very circular process, and one of the things which we end up with as a result of our cross-laminated timber manufacture is a lot of off-cut material, which is not a waste product, and it's a good quality product, but essentially it's off-cut. We haven't got a finger jointing line, so we end up looking for ways to reutilize that. And this timber knuckle that we've produced as part of the kit apart system actually serves to utilize those off-cut materials, making the whole process more viable. But in tandem with that, it also is a component that we can carry into the space. The first project will be a retrofit of a vacant retail space in East Kilbride Shopping Centre, where we need to bring each of the components through a doorway into that space. So breaking it down into those smaller components allows us to do that, and it utilises those off-cut materials and makes the whole process thereby more efficient. We've also got this wall panel system, which again, using all homegrown some material for the frame, imported wood fibre for the insulation product. A follow-on spin out of this work, we would look to stimulate the potential to create a homegrown wood fibre product as well. And then to the inside face of that panelized system, we can apply a nail laminated timber panel, so really decorative, really attractive panel, which also is biophilic. So we've got the use of lots of timber and the exposure of lots of timber on the internal elevations of our solution provides a very healthy, very natural, very attractive and aspirational workspace, but we can switch that out as well for living wall panels for different systems, and essentially those wall panels are made to be replicable subcomponents that can be utilized and reconfigured in different ways. And the system, responds to whatever the scenario is that we're coming to. In this first instance, it's an existing shell of a retail space. It might, in another scenario, be an old building that has very little in the way of external insulation. The build system provides the full insulated requirements. It provides also the sorry, let me go back into present mode here. It provides, bear with me, apologies. Provides also the acoustic performance and all the other sort of building performance requirements of the system to be a standalone solution, so a box within a box essentially. So we've cracked on and we've manufactured the prototype components of the system. So you can see here the knuckles manufactured out of the homegrown timber, some of the NLT panels. It makes for a very attractive space. We have got a full-scale demonstration unit. I haven't got photos of that, I'm afraid, but we're just assembling that at the moment, and it'll be fully assembled midweek next week. So how do we apply this in practice? So following on from as part of this initial piece of work, Andrew Livingston at Napier University did a fantastic piece of work creating a structural configurator where we can adjust key parameters within the design tool. So whether it's an internal location or external, what the wind speeds are if it is external, so we can plot where it is geographically and input that as a key characteristic. we can define what the clear span of the unit is, and this can go up to 10 meters with the existing design, and what spacing the bays fall in at. And as you enter these different characteristics, the structural configurator tells us how many lamella, what layup is required for that. So that's a really exciting piece of work, which we're now going to build on further. And what I can show you here, in fact, I'm going to switch screen and play this video. So we since the completion of the project, we've been developing a web app that will allow for the configuration of the unit itself. So you can see here my colleague Griffin, who's been producing this. This is a screen grab of him working through this. So you can set out the dimensions on the page here. You can then establish a grid. You can this is all very live, literally just taking the screen recording before the presentation. So you can rearrange the grid to meet the requirements and parameters, and adjust all the different settings, whether it's the height of the frames, whether it's the span of the frames. And you can see here as Griffin's adjusting the position of the grid, it automatically adjusts accordingly. Now in the fullness of time, we would see ourselves being able to essentially produce this through a generative design approach. But in the short term, this can be done by the individual using the tool. So we're excited by the next stage of this project, and how we take that digital process further, and how we establish an increasingly mature solution for the market. And I'll just finish on this slide. I'm a minute over, I think, but all of this then sort of loops back and feeds into that commercialization piece, where we keep incubating and accelerating, create more R&D, innovation and training, expanding the collaboration, strengthening those partnerships, and really take forward our exciting homegrown timber products and solutions for the market. I think I'm over time, apologies, so I'll pass back to Lindsay.
Thanks, Matt. That was a great presentation, and it really demonstrates how the flexibility of the approach and how it can be used for different spaces. And also, Matt showed you some of the photos there, but I have seen the prototypes in our innovation factory, and the timber is beautiful. As he said, it is absolutely lovely to look at. So now I'd like to hand over to Neil Hemmingway from 360 Architects. Neil is chair of the British Council of Offices, Next Gen Committee in Scotland, so apart from his work, has a keen interest in all things workplace design. And 360 Architects were a great fit for this project as well, because as well as their expertise in looking at office space and workplace design, they also have a specialism in regeneration of the high street. So they've been able to bring a lot to this project in different layers. So Neil, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And Matt, that was fascinating to see the app in development as well. Looks like a really interesting tool. So my part of the presentation, I'm going to focus on explaining how the workspace could have a catalytic effect on our high streets, and then I'll also touch on some of the key design approaches that we developed for the Near Home product. So starting in the context, and what is the future town centre? It's hard to go down High Street these days without seeing vacant retail shops. That's something that Matthew touched on at the start of his presentation as well. And this is something that has particularly kind of been exacerbated because of COVID. There's internet retail is dominating. Out of town retail has brought a lot of shops and uses out of the town. And I think it's looking back at what town centres used to be is how we need to take precedent from where we move forward. In the past, there's a lot of different uses such as offices, civic, healthcare, education, sports, residential. All of these uses supported each other and in turn created footfall. We need to learn from the past, and what we need to do is try and reintroduce uses that meet the community's needs. So bring back offices onto the high street, bring back studio spaces, bring back leisure, all of these kind of new uses that will support each other and create a more vibrant place to live in. The other element of the workspace, and one that I think is particularly important, is if you can see it, you can be it. So often workplaces are hidden in professional light fortresses where the only street ground floor activation is a reception area. It's very difficult to walk past and be inspired by buildings that you don't understand what's happening within them. Near home presents the opportunity to bring workspace back onto the high street and to inspire, create intrigue and create identity for workspace. In turn, it'll have the opportunity to regenerate high streets and create footfall, which will support other complementary uses. This then leads on to accessibility and equality, and something that my colleague Gina has been developing. This is an award-winning project she developed called Scattered Space. It looks at how we rebuild structures that have fueled inequalities. A lot of what Matthew also touched on at the start, particularly the 20-minute city idea, is that we need to make workspaces more accessible, and particularly to local and diverse communities. There's a lot of barriers associated with the city centre commute, and by bringing or creating this kind of idea of a hub facility that is near home, provides a lot more accessibility and equality to multiple communities. It also gives us a sense of belonging to place, and particularly will encourage the wellness of our high streets. So why near home? Matt kind of touched on particularly the toolkit idea, but if we have this accelerated change where we don't quite know where the future is going to be, we need to make sure that whatever toolkit this is, it needs to be a sustainable fit-out solution, a solution that it is designed for disassembly and can be rebuilt in different locations and adapted as our change in workplace adapts over time as well. As you can see on the diagram here, this is the kind of parts toolkit diagram that we created, which, whilst we have the structure which Matt has touched on, there's a number of different components that sit within the structure, such as the office area, the threshold and support services, the sense of arrival at the front, different wall components, different breakout areas, meeting rooms, sign pods, showers, ancillary welfare facilities at the rear of the unit. All of these need to be designed within this kit of parts component model, which allows for maximum adaptability and flexibility as we move forward. The adaptability then also goes into different locations and unit proportions. Particularly, there's a really key potential to use near home for repurposing vacant spaces on our high streets, particularly retail spaces. But the success of near home is a model that can also be adapted into a new build context. So this could be a standalone unit, for example, or it could sit within a larger retrofit solution within an existing structure, such as an industrial building or a church even, for example. And then the whole idea is that this is a completely closed loop where it can go back into disassembly and allowing for reuse and repurposing. So I'm now going to touch on some of the key design approaches that we developed for Unit 26 at East Kilbride. Whilst this was the site for the prototype, we were keen to make sure that the design was consistent for each location that near home was rolled out in. There are three key elements that we developed. Intriguing, which was engaging with the community and creating street activation on the shop front here. So this is the first section of the plan, which is about really understanding how can near home contribute to the placemaking agenda. The second element was identity, which is how do we actually position the business and make near home recognizable, creating legibility at the entrance, and then creating a series of hierarchy spaces. So we have the entrance sequence, the workspace, and then the more private, intimate spaces at the back. And then the final is inspiration. How to create a space that is welcoming, comfortable to be in for the employee, but also intriguing from a distance. So the first one, creating curb appeal. This is a mock-up that we developed from the outside, which shows kind of the design intent of the prototype. We were keen to use the near home panels and turn them on 90 degrees to create a kind of fin-like approach on the facade. It's something that would be uniquely eye-catching, particularly when you're walking down the high street. You immediately see the use of natural materials, but it also offers you this glimpse into workspace. It gives a degree of privacy, but it allows people to look in and be inspired by the place that the workspace is. The second element is creating human scale, and this is when we allow people to come into the unit itself through a journey where we've focused all of the workspaces in one kind of key area in the centre of the plan. What we tried to do is also introduce a degree of human scale into this area by track lighting solution that illuminates the workspace design, creates a little bit of intimacy over the workspace, and then the introduction of these kind of divider areas with biophilic plants that could act as acoustic buffers. At the back of the unit, there was also this kind of idea of a key feature green wall that would be visible from the outside of the street as well. And then the final element is creating privacy and flexible polyfunctional spaces at the rear. There's going to be a demand for smaller focus cam areas where you could either use as a meeting space or sound booths, particularly for multiple Microsoft Teams or Zoom calls. And what we're keen to make sure is that these spaces can cater for different activities. So they can cater for meeting rooms, but they could also be a breakout zone where you could enjoy lunch or different activities. These are also the kind of the destination at the end of the unit, so they're very visible and they're kind of featured with that green wall, which hides the sound booths from the rest of the workspace. So Matt has kind of touched on the circular economy benefits of the product itself. John is going to talk about the life cycle analysis, but one of the real kind of key benefits to near home is the social economic benefit. Through repurposing and sustainable placemaking, a product like Near Home can reinvigorate our town centres, creating a place to gather, a place to connect, a place to visit, and a place to belong through social and economic sustainability. So I'm going to pass you back to Lindsay, who is going to pass you on to John, I believe.
Great, thanks for that, Neil. It's really interesting to see it in the wider context as well as the specifics around why Unit 26 is going to look the way it does and things like that. So thank you for that. Right, we'll move on to our next speaker now. Our next speaker is John Stevenson, who's a director from Building Research Solutions. John is an expert in all things sustainability. And one of the things that was really important for us during Near Homes was to ensure that we wanted a sustainable approach to retrofit. We wanted to make sure that the carbon footprint was as low as possible. So John and the team at BRS looked at conducting a life cycle analysis for the project. So John, I will hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Lindsay. Just curious, can people see my screen?
Yeah, I can see that fine, John.
Perfect, that's great. Just a couple of technical issues this morning, but hopefully over that just now. So yeah, thanks Lindsay, and hello to everyone, and thanks again to CSIC and CIAT Scotland East for organising and hosting this event, and to Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government for funding and enabling the project to happen. So the Near Home project, as you've heard so far, has clear lines of social enhancement and strengthening Scotland's economy. But the design and implementation of this initiative also comes with positive sustainability and environmental impacts. So I would like to wrap up this webinar just now by covering and highlighting some of the specifics in this. So my presentation is structured to cover the goal and scope of the sustainability criteria and assessment, the life cycle inventory that was created, and then I'll describe the results of the assessment for the Near Home office pod itself. And I'll finish with the two of the other sustainability results associated with the pod's existence. So the scope of our role in this project was to monitor and collect the design decisions from the project team. And our goal was to analyse the sustainability variables within these decisions to define the overall sustainability impact. So the scope of the entire project allowed us to focus the evaluation and assessment on the structure, as Matt has spoken about for now, and we have omitted the embodied energies related to the interior fit out for now. Although the energies related to the use of lights and office equipment and appliances were included within the operational use stage. So all those decisions from the design team and the project team translated into materials, methods and processes which created a set of input variables for our sustainability calculations. Those variables were used to determine the global warming potential impact of the near home office pod. So to fully evaluate this impact, we explored the life cycle from cradle to cradle to demonstrate the versatility of the pod. The assessment included disassembly, relocation, and reassembly 5 times over its service life. And land use here in this graphic equates to the retrofit element of the project, where we're not breaking any new ground. So the output of the sustainability impact assessment was a benchmark for this design to enable designers and policymakers to best utilize this method of construction. So I've added this slide to allow everyone to quickly refresh on sustainability terminology allocated to each life cycle in the assessment. And we assessed the pod from stage A1, which is the start of the cradle phase, through to the end of stage D, which is known as cradle to cradle and part of the circular economy metric. So once all decisions had been made, we created a life cycle inventory, which becomes a part of the asset tag information and digital information assigned to all part of the pod's digital model. So our global warming potential impact assessment continued into this graphic, which illustrates the material and energy flows, including transportation across the production, manufacture, and installation of a near home office pod. So each material used in the construction of the pod was tracked back to its source at the beginning of its own unique life cycle. And for stage A3 to A5, which is the manufacturing and assembly, the times, workflows, and equipment needed to construct and assemble the components into the office pod were taken from work by Louise Rogers at Edinburgh Napier on homegrown timber. Mark Millen at CSIC provided all the specifications for manufacturing machinery, and we conducted our own measurements on smaller power tools that would be required. So compiling, verifying, and validating the material and specifications into libraries and then into a life cycle inventory allowed us to explore the key sustainability performance variables. So now I'll show some of these and highlight just a couple for today. So we have the operational energy use profile. It was assumed that the whole energy demand will be provided by grid electricity, and DEFRA and BEIS carbon conversion factors were used to convert into CO2 or kilograms of CO2e. So the baseline for the pod is estimated at 2,500 kilograms CO2e, and decarbonisation of the grid drops this to between 100 and 500 kilograms CO2 by the end of the 60-year lifespan. So each of the curved lines are scenarios for continued decarbonisation of the UK electricity grid, and each are calculated to achieve a global temperature limit and applied either with or without carbon capture and storage function. Now the grey line in this chart is the one that we've brought into the next set of charts for final reporting. So here we've got 4 charts, and I promise this is the last kind of complex looking thing you'll see this morning, certainly in this presentation. These are the sustainability impacts across the life cycle that I described earlier. So if you can see it, carbon emissions are above the red line and carbon savings are below the red line. Now the first chart on the left, which is by far the most important part of our analysis and one that we should really be focusing on here today, is the stage A1 to A5, which includes raw material extraction, transportation to manufacturing, then manufacturing and installation and handover of the pod. So this really shows the positive environmental impacts with sequestered carbon potential known as biogenic carbon of the timber products. Now I've included the next 3 charts to demonstrate just how important and how impactful grid decarbonisation and human energy behaviour to a building's can be to a building's whole life sustainability credentials. So the next chart, marked as B, includes the operational energy use and assumed it has a decarbonisation rate over the 60 years of 4% with no carbon capture and storage, which is the grey line in that previous chart. So the operational energy use begins to outweigh the carbon sequestration benefits. So this was estimated at very, very early design stage, but it's important to show how impactful office equipment and HVAC systems can be, and the importance of in situ monitoring of those assets from the physical twin, and that will help provide higher resolution on this value. Stages C and D are compared on the far right. Stage C is end of life scenarios, and again, this suffers from things beyond the control of design teams, like inefficiencies in waste processing processes. Plus, the majority of wood-based environmental product declarations assume that the wood material at the end of its life will be incinerated due to its high caloric value, which adds to the CO2 impact. Now, stage D is where things start getting really positive again due to this method of construction and the use of homegrown mass timber. So the impacts of the carbon savings from reuse, recycle and recover potential, the positive message here is at this stage, the work in this project, due to the nature of how components are designed and delivered, takes the burden of processing those materials for the next stage of the next life cycle of the next project. So when the materials from this project, designed as they are disassembled for the last time and moved into the life cycle of the next project, then that next project suffers from benefits from all of the advantages of not having to reprocess all those materials again. So the carbon savings here start to compound over a much longer life than what the building expected to last for. So the message here really is the use of mass timber and homegrown products provide significant sustainability advantages and benefits, which can help the whole life of the building, but is contingent on operational energy use, decarbonisation of the grid, and end-of-life treatment of materials. So that was a very, very brief show for some of the positive sustainability impacts that we're likely to see from the near home pod during construction and its life. And monitoring of its life is vitally important, but now I want to cover two additional sustainability parameters relating to transportation. The first is transportation of the pod itself to reuse it in other locations, and the travel of the workforce who will be using the pod as an alternative. So in the reuse, disassembly and reassembly scenarios, we balance the pod's initial location and the fundamentals of the 20-minute neighbourhood initiative and the proximity of other towns with satellite around Glasgow. So here we calculate the average short distance between all of these locations and the average long distance between the locations, and now we have an estimate of carbon impact per relocation of between 400 and 1,000 kilograms CO2 per move. So this was done to allow for extrapolation of the pod's impact across other locations and to inform movement schedules. Finally, we assessed the environmental impacts on sustainable transport of people, specifically those that may or are most likely to use the near home pod. Applying the fundamental principles of promoting the 20-minute neighbourhood, we assessed the walking and cycling routes and distances from the residential areas to the planned location of a near home office pod, and this gave us a radius to identify transportation nodes. So in context to the overall boundary and size of East Kilbride, our analysis focused on a relatively small part of that area, and from this we used the DataShine Scotland commute data sets, which are collated from Scotland census and national record data, to identify the travel nodes within our 20-minute neighbourhood radius. And we investigated the travel modes related to the work, related to travelling for work for those four locations inside our East Kilbride 20-minute radius, which identify Glasgow city centre as the most common destination outside of East Kilbride itself. So we gathered data for travelling from those four nodes inside our radius to outside the radius to Glasgow and back again. So it was one round trip per day and we investigated travelling by bus, coach, car and train. So the impact related to travel for work and switching from commuting to Glasgow for work to commuting to the near home pod, as you would expect, are extremely positive, especially where vehicles with internal combustion engines are involved, or times when EV batteries are being charged with fossil fuel generated electricity. So for clarity, the walking to the near home pod value is 0 for now, because we haven't included metabolic carbon dioxide emissions related to breathing. So lastly, when compared against an equivalent traditional office building with the impacts of 2,900 kilograms of CO2e per metre squared, the benefit of this timber design, homegrown timber design construction of the office pod are very clear, with at around 530 kilograms of CO2e per metre squared. So the last thing here just to note is that the analysis of the traditional office building uses quite generic industry average data and is only used here to provide a clear indicative comparison. And so these values are taken from research that we're continuing to do with CSIC and by my colleague Ruth Saint. So the next steps is to, if we can, use the Gemini principles to calibrate the building information model to optimize the current digital twin for sustainability input asset information, which will require some in situ monitoring of processes and procedures. And once validated, it will allow for significantly less error when extrapolating, and we can see how this can really have strong positive impacts across the country. So that's it for me this morning. Thanks everyone for your time. I hope that's been somewhat informative, and I'll pass back to Lindsay.
Great, thank you, John. It's a fascinating project, and just the amount of detail that you went into in the life cycle analysis. It's great to see it laid out like that. And sorry, I should have said in my introductions, John is the chair of the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologies, Scotland East, who are promoting this event with us today. So what we're going to do now, before we move on to Q&As, we're going to go to our second poll. So Danielle, could you bring up the poll for me, please? And we're just wanting to know here, what are the priorities for you when deciding where to work? Duration of commuting time, the facilities available, opportunity for better work-life balance, social aspect, or none of the above? And if you could select all of them that apply. A clear indication there for opportunity for better work-life balance, and that ties in, I think, with what Matt Eastwood was saying in his introduction about the changing workplace conditions. So I'd like to invite all the panelists to come back onto the screen now, and we will move on to the Q&A. Great, thanks everyone. Right, so first question that's came through, and this was it's for Matt's presentation, but based on the question, I'm going to go Matt Stevenson. And the question was, what was the lighting system that you have used on this unit? Now, we did bring in a specialist lighting designer, and we couldn't bring the entire team on this, but we brought in Steam Design, who provided the lighting for this. Matt, do you want to expand at all on that design?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was fantastic to have Seam sort of contributing to the project. The assessment that they did on the lighting and the suggestions which were made, really striking. And it's worth noting that the focus for the first project is East Kilbride Shopping Centre, where it's a vacant retail space which has no windows. So, we have no natural daylight to benefit from, other than some that may come from the sort of concourse. But so the lighting design was really, really crucial. I quickly brought up the design document. I could share that, but essentially we've got a combination of some sort of accent lighting, which really helped establish the signature and the aspirational sort of nature of the space. We've then got the some strip lighting, some very directional lighting, some task lighting specific to the individual workspaces. There's also, what would make a really exciting inclusion within that initial project. One of the optional extras is essentially a roof window simulation, which which casts the sunlight onto the wall, which really creates that sense of an external roof window projecting into space, which I think would transform the space and the experience of the space. But it was the lighting design also took consideration of not the cadence of lighting, but whatever it is, where it maps onto the daily cycles of the sun coming up, going down. Apologies, my can't somebody else will remember what that's actually called, I'm sure, for me. But yeah, fantastic piece of work that was undertaken.
All right, thanks, Matt. We'll move on to the next question. I suspect this may have came in before John finished his presentation, but the question was, can you explain any sustainability elements other than the timber? John, you went into quite a lot about the travel aspect there. But, is there anything else that John or perhaps Matt Stevenson would like to highlight at this point in time?
Yeah, well, I'll just come in before Matt picks up. Yes, it was primarily looking at the benefits of homegrown timber and structural timber for the purposes of what was trying to be achieved. We did look at other areas as well, and there's certainly within the analysis, within the much wider analysis and report that the team currently have, there is some hot spotting that was done that identified some rather carbon-intensive material that isn't produced or manufactured in the UK or even in Scotland, and also isn't timber based. So there are perhaps more timber materials that can come out and replace those. I'm thinking specifically around acoustics, around acoustic paneling and things like that. And also this sort of analysis at this stage allows for the design specifiers to have a look at individual carbon impacts of the inventory, and see where the kind of really big easy wins could be, and shifting some of the supply chains. But yeah, primarily timber, because the building itself is significantly built with a large amount of timber.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think the timber does a good job of facilitating the reuse. So if to disassemble and reassemble the kit of parts multiple times and reconfigure them, actually the use of timber is very forgiving in that. So that still relates to the timber side of things, but I think the sustainability is, very much with this project about that, ability to reutilize multiple times, and yeah, the longevity and the life cycle of that. So we would look to use it to further stimulate, the opportunity for other biogenic materials from homegrown resources as well, wherever possible.
Right, thanks, Matt. Next question from Rory. Does the near home concept require virgin timber, or will also look to reuse timber from the UK's ageing building stock? And that's an interesting one, because as I understand it, at the minute the timber has to be dried to a certain specification to be used. But Matt, perhaps you'd be able to expand. Matt Stevenson, perhaps you'd be able to expand on that.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, but delighted to address that, because I think it'd be great to look at future potential for that. There is a project that colleagues at Napier University are involved with in Future Wood, which is looking at how do we use the timber arising from existing housing and construction stock in future use, and we're keen, as one of the sort of follow-on pieces of work, to look at incorporating that in some mass timber solutions. I would think with this project it would probably be, it could be possible for the glue laminated timber portals. It would be more immediately addressable for using as the nail laminated timber panels, especially with the nail lam. There's the lack of the use of adhesives in that means this is slightly less sensitive to moisture content. But some of the timber from existing stock, it may well sit at a reasonable moisture content level as well. So certainly something we'd be very, very keen to look at for this and other projects. Thanks.
Right,
Thanks for the question.
Next question from Daniel. What's the best way to be considered for future construction tender opportunities? Daniel, I'm not sure if you're meaning from CSIC in general or specific near homes. If it's for near home, then the idea with this will eventually be open source, so anyone will be able to. There will be no need to tender. Anyone will be able to use it. If you have a building that you want to use near home to get for, then by all means drop me a line. My contact details from the CSIC website. and construction and tender opportunities with CSIC in general would be going through Edinburgh Napier University, our host university. But as I say, my contact details are on the on our CSIC website, so feel free to give me a discussion about it if you want to know any more details on that. A question from Neil. For John, he's beginning to look. He's in Ireland, beginning to explore the circular economy calculations, and wants to know what software you're using.
Yep, that's a very good question, and it's the answer to this question is very much a similar answer we give when asking what software we use for building information modelling. The short answer is it's just a giant spreadsheet. The spreadsheets we have for this relatively small and quite simple building are huge, and the software we use to evaluate the databases for the materials either comes from environmental product declarations, or we use CIMAPro for doing some of the analysis on the supply chains and things like that. We also use other software to evaluate the operational phase, like in this one it was one of Trimble's software called Saphira. We also used IES. But the calculations and methodologies in the BSE and ISOs for circular economy and for life cycle assessment kind of produce all of the formulas that we need, and we essentially use Microsoft Excel for the spreadsheeting part of it. But probably the most important one for us was CIMAPro for some of the materials we couldn't find EPDs for.
All right, that's great. Thank you, John. And I'll quickly do this last question. How do you see the near home concept being used by single business or rentable desks? I can answer that one. I think at this point in time, what we see is it maybe more as a single business. In fact, that's what it will be for the pilot. Then eventually we would like to explore this potential of, for example, public sector agencies working together. We don't see it as being, you know, a competitor to WeWork or something like that. This is a different kind of concept. Matt Eastwood, I don't know if there's anything else that you're wanting to come in there with Transport Scotland's thoughts on that.
I think that you've ably answered that question. What we want to do is encourage people to think about how they can use vacant buildings in the future, and I think that because it's open source, there'll be a variety of different options open to how the tool is used, but we're certainly most interested in how we can enable the tool to be used to use existing vacant buildings in our high streets and to increase footfall that will make both work more resilient, more flexible, more accessible, and contribute to the vibrancy of our high streets and support 20-minute neighbourhoods as well.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I think that's all we've got time for. So I would like to thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our panel, Matt Eastwood, Matt Stevenson, John Simpson, and Neil Hemmingway. As I mentioned at the start of the show, the webinar, you will be sent feedback. We'd appreciate your thoughts and let us know what you think, any areas for improvement. CSIC run regular events on a variety of topics, so if you want anything else, then check out our website, details of all events there. Thank you for joining us, and have a lovely day, everyone. Goodbye.